Good morning, boys. Today our lesson is rectangle. Before we start the lesson, we have some slides as revision for the previous lesson. Determine whether the quadrilateral is parallelogram. As you notice here, diagonals bisecting each other. This part equal this part and this part equal this part. This means this quadrilateral is parallelogram, and the reason because diagonals bisecting each other. Yes, diagonals bisect each other. Another example. Is this quadrilateral parallelogram? Yes. Why? Because each pair of opposite sides are congruent. This angle congruent to this angle, and this angle congruent to this angle. Then it is parallelogram because both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. Use the distance formula to determine if A 37, B 910, C 106, D 43 are the vertices of a parallelogram. Here I must find that opposite sides are congruent. I find AB and CD. Then I find BC and AD. Of course, you will have each pair of opposite sides are congruent. Again, I repeat the sides. AB and CD, then BC with AD. You will find that each pair of opposite sides are congruent using the properties that in parallelogram each pair of opposite sides are congruent. This example, the next one the same, but you will find that opposite sides are not congruent, therefore you say it is not parallelogram. Here, he said for you that QRST is parallelogram. Which statement is true? Angle Q 75. We know in the parallelogram consecutive angles are supplementary. This means angle Q and angle R 180, angle Q and angle T 180. He said for me that measurement of angle T is 105, and this is correct. Why? Because 105 plus 75 equal 180. Of course, angle S 105 wrong. Angle S must be 75. Now we come to our new lesson, which is rectangle. Of course, before we start, boys, rectangle is a kind of parallelogram, but it has extra properties. What this mean? This means rectangle takes all the properties of parallelogram, which mean each pair of opposite sides are parallel and congruent, opposite angles are congruent, consecutive angles are 180, diagonals bisecting each other's, opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent. Rectangle takes all of these properties, and rectangle has some properties special for him only. Let us start. Diagonals of rectangle. The first properties that rectangle take is that if a parallelogram is rectangle, then its diagonals are congruent. Now, diagonals in rectangle has two properties. They are congruent and they are bisecting each other. Again, I repeat. In parallelogram, diagonals are bisecting each other. They intersect in the middle. This in parallelogram. But in rectangle, they are bisecting each other and they are congruent. What this mean? This means that JL and KM are congruent. If you find these properties in any parallelogram, this means this parallelogram is rectangle. See here. Construction. A rectangular garden gate is reinforced with diagonal braces to prevent it from sagging. If JK, the length, equal 12 feet. And ln is this, half of the diagonal. Again, ln is what? Half of the diagonal, equal 6.5 feet. Find km. Km is complete diagonal. At the beginning he said for me that this garden is rectangle. What this mean? This means that diagonals are congruent. This means km equal jl. But I know half of the diagonal, which is ln. ln is half of diagonal lj. ln equals 6.5. This means lj equals 6.5 times 2, because I have two parts. ln 6.5 and nj 6.5. 6.5 plus 6.5 equals 13. This means the complete diagonal JL is 13 feet. But in rectangle, diagonals are congruent. Therefore, KM and JL are congruent, which means that KM equals 13 feet. Why? Because KM is congruent to JL. Therefore, they are 13 feet each one of them. This is the solution here. He said for you that Jn plus Ln, the parts of the diagonal, equal JL. Both are 13. But because we have rectangle, diagonals are congruent. JL equal Km. This means Km equal 13 feet, which is the answer. Here the same. Quadrilateral EFGH is rectangle. When he said rectangle, direct I know that diagonals are congruent without thinking. GH 6. FH, the diagonal is 15. Of course, he give me this GH equals 6 like a kind of disturbing, because he don't want to give me the information direct. He wants to disturb me. GH is the width of the rectangle. I don't care about it. I care about diagonal. FH is diagonal, equal 15. Find GJ. Of course, here he did not ask me about the complete diagonal. He asked me about half of the diagonal, GJ. The complete diagonal, 15. Then half of diagonal is 15 divided 2, which means GJ equals 7.5.